just an experienced missionary from Africa, originated from Baltimore, Maryland. And also we have on Zoom, via Zoom, we have Pastor Stan Collins from Argentina. You can see where he's from. He's displaying it on his T-shirt. Just a man that with his wife has missioned throughout South America, has just been a huge, has made a huge impact through with our ministry in South America. So we want to welcome you today, Pastor Stan. And today the topic of Missions Monday is managing your money, finances. What do you do with money, and what are the pitfalls? We'll have a lot of different subjects we talk about today. We want it to be encouraging. We want this to bless people. We want this to be you could say a time of where people get God's mind on this subject. And we want it to bless, actually Missions Monday, we want this to bless the world. We want people in missions to be blessed by this. We want to overcome with God's mind the devil's strategies in many different areas. So, and this is one of them today. We want to speak about finances. We want to bring it to the light and speak about it. And with an opening message, we have Pastor Ronaldo Brown. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great. We had a lot of positive feedback. Last week, we talked about how to raise support, which is a huge question in missions. And this week, we're looking at how to manage the support that we raise. The verses that come to my mind in a broader context is 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, which says, "Let a man so consider us as servants of God and stewards of the mysteries of God." And you might say that how you're supported is a mystery of God, but stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards that one be found faithful. I find that interesting that Paul doesn't say be found fruitful. He says be found faithful. And I would say the reason for that is because the fruitfulness is based upon God, but the faithfulness is a volitional decision that I decide. The bigger issue concerning managing money is the word stewardship. 1/6 of the Gospels and 1/3 of all the parables deal with stewardship. We were placed on the earth, not as owners, but as stewards, which is why in Genesis chapter 2:15, God did not give the garden to Adam and Eve. He put them in the garden of Eve, he put them in the Garden of Eden, to be stewards. They were not owners, they were stewards. I've been thinking a lot about this topic in the way of money, because a lot of times it's an area that we as missionaries, we see it about needing it. And then we don't think too deeply about spending it. And the way the Bible talks about money, it talks about it 3 ways. It talks about receiving it, and we all love that, preserving it, and giving it. And of the 2,000 plus verses in the Bible on money, 20% deal with receiving it. 70% deals with giving it. And only 10% of the verses in the Bible on money, roughly about 200 verses, deal with preserving it or managing it. So there's an overwhelming emphasis on the distribution of money. And that's where stewardship comes in. That if I'm not a proper manager or steward of the resources that God gives me, then I'm going to be very careless in how I spend or how I utilize that money. I think sometimes as missionaries, we focus on getting the money, and then we look at the needs and start applying it to needs, but we don't apply our mind to management. And it's really a resource. Money is a resource. Team members are a resource. Physical resources like a building, like a car, they're all resources. And we tend to be more organizational and more administrative and actually more concerned about managing physical assets than we are about money. We can be very careless with money. And stewardship is really a question of operation. Where I am, God gives me certain resources to operate with, and I'm charged with God's wisdom in James chapter 1, 5, and 6, God's wisdom that I ask for and God gives on how to manage his resources. A lot of the New Testament talks about the church utilizing through the gifts the resources of the body of Christ. So there's a lot of management there. Basically, money is a tool. First, Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 12 calls it a shadow, or it says it's a defense. It's a resource to be used. But with any resource with stewardship, God entrusts. I kind of put this thing together. God entrusts His wealth, because in Psalm 24:1 and 1 Corinthians 10:26, it's His, it's not ours. His wealth to us, His servants, in Romans 6:18 and 19, and Ephesians 6:6, to manage, in 1 Timothy 6:6 through 8, for His purposes. His wealth to His servants to manage for His purpose. And God has charged us with that. And there's a lot of ways to look at that. I think as missionaries, often we are careless with money. We don't plan for it. We always assume that we're always on the hunt for it, but when we get it, we're sloppy with it. We hide behind faith sometimes. I'm going to live by faith, and I'm going to live frivolously. God does not protect me from carelessness with resources. I don't mismanage a building. But I can mismanage people sometimes on the mission field. But really, money is a valuable asset. Because of time, I don't want to go long here. But if you look at the parable in Matthew 25 verses 14 to 30, it's one of those many parables that talk about stewardship. There's 4 principles I want to pull out about that. The first principle is concerning as a missionary is duration, the period of time, and that's in verses 14 and 19 of Matthew 25. There is a set period of time that God is entrusting me with missionary support. I may not be on the field forever. I may not live that way. Oftentimes, there's the 2 periods of adjustment that happen in a missionary's life. You move to the mission field, and you tend to spend money on the field the way you spent money in your home country. And that period of adjustment is kind of hard because you mismanage it. You may overspend, usually what happens. And then when you come off the field, you tend to live like you're on the field back in your own home, and then you may underspend. So that period of adjustment financially is kind of hard. It takes a season to get there. So duration. On the duration for this period of time, I want to have God's mind about how I manage money overseas or the foreign field. I want to have God's mind for that. Number 2, the second word is responsibility. This is my opportunity to participate, and that's in verse 19. This is my opportunity to participate. I have responsibility. And notice under responsibility, with the talents, he didn't give no one got the same amount, okay? No one got the same amount. In other words, I can't sit there and compare what I receive versus what someone else receives as support, okay? All I know is I am responsible to be a good steward of what God has given, okay? So there's a certain measure of responsibility when donors or supporters, and there's many ways you receive support. There's one-time giving, there's monthly giving, there's yearly giving, there's bi-monthly giving. However it comes in, you have a responsibility to God and to that donor to be effectively and with integrity manage that. I've talked to missionaries in different organizations, including ours, where people have mismanaged money because they have a lot to play with. They just are frivolous with it because they don't see it as being given by God. But I have a responsibility to God and to the donors that I give, how I handle that money. And I cannot go back to donors and say, okay, I need more money because I mismanaged what you gave me. They're entrusting me for the vision, but there's a measure of responsibility there. Number 3, Matthew 25, verses 21 to 23, reward. There is a benefit for me. As a faithful financial steward, there is a benefit for me. Internally, there is the joy and the satisfaction of honoring God in a resource. Externally, there can be possibly the multiplication or the addition of assets. So there's an internal and there's an external benefit, reward-wise, because of my faithfulness with God's gift and God's resource. And then number 4, there's a penalty in verses 24 to 29 of Matthew 25. And this is the divine consequence of unfaithfulness. When I'm unfaithful with my finances, by that I mean I don't manage it. When I don't manage my finances, there can be some problems. And I can say, oh, it's the devil. And sometimes the financial difficulty we have on the mission field is not the devil. It's me poorly managing what God has given. It's me not handling it correctly. I know in my own life, I can think of times in my life where I've received support, and then I didn't think something through. I mismanaged it, and then it cost money. And then later on, I realized that's not the devil. That's me. I wasn't conscientious. I didn't plan well. I didn't budget well. Or I lived frivolously in careless faith and said, okay, I'm just going to trust God and spend all the money on this thing that I thought was God and it wasn't God. And I realized later that I could have been a little bit more conscientious in prayer, and I could have waited. I could have even got counsel, but I didn't. I was reckless. Or I was fast. On the mission field, you don't have a lot of money, so you need to be. I always say have a slow yes and a quick no when it comes to finance. A slow yes and a quick no. There's some decisions you have to make a lot sooner because of time and situations have urgency. But overall, when it comes to how I spend money on the mission field, I want a slow yes and I want a quick no because I want to make sure that I'm being a good steward of what God has given. And there's a lot we can say, but I just wanted to open up with that the real question about how to manage money on the mission field is really a question of stewardship. And I have found that many missionaries that are sloppy with their stewardship and their finances are also sloppy in other areas with their stewardship. They're not a great steward with other areas like their time or like their schedule or like with their ministry, but very careless with their finance. Usually it goes across the board because carelessness and poor stewardship tends to be infectious. It bleeds into other areas of your life. So with that, let's open it up and talk further about managing money or stewardship on the mission field.
Okay, thank you, Pastor Ronaldo. Before we go to Pastor Stan, I just have a quick question. Could you explain to that what you mean by a slow yes and a quick no? I want to understand that in terms of finances. What do you mean by that?
In terms of finances, hopefully you're working with a budget. What's funny about a budget is it tends to evolve. Things happen. Kids are born, unexpected expenses come, so you've got a budget with a little bit of float. I would say, so in the budget, ordinarily, there are things that happen on a regular basis, like rent, like electricity, like if you have a car, petrol, things like that, healthcare, things like that. Those things are every month. But when something comes outside the budget, when the budget is challenged by a topic, it could be an emergency. Like I've been in places where we said, okay, we got to buy a new generator. Do we? I remember sitting with a guy one time. He said, we got to buy a new generator. I said, really? Yeah, because the other one's broke. Can we fix it? Oh, we've never tried. Have we tried? I said, go back and think some more and come back to me. 4 hours later, he comes back and says, I think we can fix it, but we got to spend this much money. Do we? Okay, let's go back and look at how you want to fix it. You want to try to do, after this back and forth for an entire day, I reduced a $2,000 purchase to a $35 repair because I was slow. Okay, we're going to spend, I want to be frugal because to be honest with you, when it comes to support and when it comes to church money, I value that more than my own personal. It's just, there's an integrity that's connected to there that I just have this picture in my mind of this little old lady mailing an envelope with a check for $5 and it's her last $5 and she's giving it to the mission. And I want to be honorable to that. I want to honor that. So my yes is slow. I'm not so quick to say yes to things. And a slow yes means I go to God with it. I pray about it. Sometimes I get counsel like, is this the best way? Should we do this? What do you think? Sometimes with my wife, I'll say, should we do that? I'll consider things. I'll look historically. I'll look experientially. I'll talk to other people. I get input. And then walk in how God leads. A quick no might be, I don't sense God in it. It's not practical. It's not for. I don't see the kingdom being glorified in it. I don't see the body of Christ being edified in it. It's a quick no because it's almost like obviously not a wise decision financially.
Right. Okay. Great. Yeah, I understand that. Thank you for that. Now let's go, Pastor Stan. Pastor Stan is a missionary. He's lived on the mission field for how many years have you lived on the mission field, Pastor Stan? 25. I think he said, I read your lips. I couldn't hear you.
We can't hear you, Pastor Sam, but we can read your lips a little bit. There you go.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you, sir.
How many years? 25?
25 years, yeah.
Okay, good. He's a missionary, and you heard what Pastor Ronaldo said, right? You weren't waving your hands. Okay,
Yeah,
you did.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I want to start today with this aspect of being a steward before we get into managing, like how you see yourself. You're supported by people. You don't have a job on the mission field. You're supported by people. How you perceive yourself as a steward. You're receiving monthly donations, monthly support. How you honor that, realizing that it's not your money, it came from somebody else, and ultimately that it's God's money. Start at that place for us, and how do you start there with your finances?
well, I would say like it begins with recognizing that the people who give are generous. The people who give are generous. Like one of the verses that I think about when I think about this subject is Isaiah. Um, uh, what's the chapter? Isaiah 32, maybe is I believe is the chapter. It talks about it says like a generous man devises generous things. Yeah. So and by and something like by generosity, I don't actually like, but my computer is sitting on my Bible right now.
Yeah.
Sorry. Uh, I had to prop it up with something, but yeah, a generous man devises generous things. So I think like the first thing that I think about is that in terms of like financial support
Verse 8.
is that no one is being obligated. Also, Paul talks about it in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, right? When he talks about uh, the giving, right? And you had promised, but that it would be not a matter of obligation, but a matter of generosity. In 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 5, right? That it would be by generosity. So like, uh, I want to be, like, I believe that people are generous towards, have been generous. There's not no obligation. So people, any support that we receive is out of generosity. Now, at the same time, I believe that that my attitude with that money also should be one of generosity. A generous man devises generous things.
Verse 8.
Generous. That's one of my favorite like ideas. I thought like when we were in Peru for 11 years. We counted one time, Karen and I counted the number of people who spent at least one semester with us, missionaries who came and at least spent like 4 months. Many of them spent years, years, 6, 7 years in some cases that other young missionaries, mostly young, came and spent with us. But one of the things that we noticed about, and actually, like I said, like maybe, I think we counted over 30 or more people, young people mostly, who spent at least one semester with us. So if you spend some months, then you have an opportunity to be, if you're there for just a few weeks or a month or something like that, it's one thing. But if you spend months and even years, then you have an opportunity to be stingy or generous. And one of the things that we noticed with our young people that came with us and were with us there was their generosity, generosity towards each other, towards the team, towards the people of the church. So that's a principle for me.
It's beautiful, beautiful, Pastor Stan.
People who give, they give generously. So I don't think like they give generously, but I should be stingy.
Right.
Like I think
like
I should be.
It's like you're quenching the flow of the money, of the spirit behind it, of the way it was given, and it stops it. Let's stay there. Both Pastor Ronaldo and Pastor Stan, you've had numerous team members. Okay, let's just let's go there for a second. What advice could you give to team members? Okay, maybe you've seen the way they have used their support, maybe the way they have spent their money, maybe the way they have budgeted. What advice could you give to a team member, somebody that's on the field, so they could plan to stay? You could say, stay there a long time, because sometimes people just say, I don't have enough money, I have to go home now. Or they see their savings as like, I've got the X amount of dollars to be on the mission field for 9 months. I'm going to go, and there's no plans for the future, and they live like that. How can you advise or even critique or suggest or pitfalls you've seen, using the word Pittsburgh there, using pitfalls that people have had that you could advise people in a way that they could avoid them with finances? We'll start with you, Pastor Stan.
Okay. Well, work would be okay. Like when Karen and I, when we first in 1996, when we first moved full time to South America, like I worked, we had about 6 or 7% of the finances that we needed from financial donations. So
basically nothing. Yes.
What?
Basically nothing you had for what you needed.
So I taught English. So I went in every day and I took the 6:30 train in the morning and to the Capitol and worked speaking English. And it worked. All I can say is it worked. The thing for me is not about, it's about the calling.
Amen.
If you really believe that you're called, then you don't have a problem with working to be there. If you think that this is of God and that you are actually in a place where God is calling you and that you are actually there's a great motivation. You're falling in love with the people, and you don't want to leave.
Yes.
So
yeah.
So you don't mind. So you can get up. You can get up whatever time you have to get up. Is whatever time you have to get up, and
beautiful.
however many hours you have to work is whatever many. I mean, I prefer. It's wonderful when we had missionaries who didn't have to work. It's great. They can be more with us. And more with the team. Obviously, it's better, but on the other hand, well, and actually, I could say this, like one of the things that happened in Peru with like a lot of our people, like for example, like Pastor John Stambowski. Okay, John was with us for over 6 years, like 6.5 years. And what he would do is he would work in the summer when he would go back up for convention, June, July, and August, and he would work a lot. He would work he worked 2 different jobs up there, saved his money, put it away, came back down, and didn't have to work for 9 months in Peru.
Right.
But that was what, and actually he was an example. There were several other people who did similar things to that. There were other people who did similar things to what
Okay, you just froze, Pastor Stan, if you're aware of that.
enough missionary support that they didn't have to do that.
Okay, great. So let's just summarize that. Like you could say, if you are called, one way of managing your money, or the best manager of your money, is knowing that you are called and falling in love with people. That automatically has a motivation that you want to stay there. You want to manage your money properly so that you can be a missionary in the field. It's a great thought there. Pastor Ronaldo, let's ask you. You've led teams, you've led missionaries, you've led people that have come over for practicums. Tell us what you could suggest, or how a person could manage their money most effectively on the mission field.
I think you want to have what I call a pre-budget, which is after talking to the team leader or kind of surveying the land. If you are the team leader, you have a budget that you believe is going to work in the country. But unfortunately, that budget's going to evolve as you get there. You're going to have things. Plus, also, too, when you're first starting out, there's some one-time costs like house, furniture, maybe visas, all those kind of things. And they come sometimes seasonally every 2 years or 1 year. So that's something to keep in mind. But a pre-budget Then there's an actual budget that starts working like, okay, yeah, this is what I actually need to live on. And that's an important number. That's an important number because it gives parameters to how you move. It actually governs your liberality. I want to be liberal, but I don't want to be careless. Like, I'm not going to give my rent money away because I'm liberal. So I got to balance the liberality with some boundaries. Like, I can be liberal, and I love that verse in Isaiah 32, verse 8, but I want to be careful. But I think also when we walk with God, we should be more liberal. The more we walk with God, there's two things we should be, which is more thankful and more liberal. But I want to have that budget gives me some kind of parameter, a baseline. So that budget matters. And then I would say, secondly, so I have a budget, have a pre-budget and a budget. Second of all, I would say a couple things. Number one, I believe, my conviction is you should tithe. You should tithe support. I always have. Dwayne George taught me that a long, long time ago in the mission field, and I never forgot it.
Beautiful.
Tithe. I think you should tithe. You say, well, this money is for God. Yes. Everything that comes to me is from God and for God. So I tithe. I even, believe it or not, I tithe plane tickets. I tithe everything because it all comes from the same source. So I don't isolate the money. If someone gives me money for a plane, I tell them in advance, I'm going to tithe this. Or I take it out of another group of money and I tithe it. I tithe everything. I think I want God in everything. And one of the ways I put God in everything, besides him leading me, is tithe. But that's my conviction. Other missionaries may not share that. But I tithe support. Number three, I give. Mother Teresa said, no one ever got broke giving. I give. I give to missions. I'm not just receiving support, but I also support missionaries. Like you said, I don't want to be the person that receives, but I don't give. I want to be a giver. I want to participate in the blessing that my donors are getting. And I want to also learn how to give by faith. Number three, I would seriously consider being careful with investing support. I have a problem with that. I've been asked that question over the years. Should I put some support I got, like say I'm leaving in a year, I've saved the ticket money, should I put that in a short-term instrument? I'm of the mind, no. I do believe in savings, but not investment. And that's a different conversation. Emergency fund. There's unexpected costs that happen on the mission field. Someone gets hurt, someone gets injured, something happens, an emergency fund. And I would say 10% of my monthly support should go to an emergency fund. Because one thing can happen and wreck your entire budget and can jeopardize your whole operation on the field, an emergency fund. And this is something I learned later in the mission. Have an emergency donor. That's an interesting topic. An emergency donor is a donor who doesn't support you, or maybe they do. But this donor and you have an understanding. If you get in a pinch, and I mean a real pinch, you can call them and they'll get involved on some level. An emergency donor. They may not give all the time, they may not give it all, but if you get in a pinch, it's good to have that person to call. Because most of us, our emergency donor is the church. We get in a hole, we call Baltimore, okay, I'm stuck in a prison in Guatemala, and I think, okay, that's great, our church is behind. But I've grown now that I have one or two supporters that I've had a very serious conversation, not in a time of trouble, but in a time of I'm okay. But I want to be honest with you. If something ever should happen, can I call you? Would you get involved? I ask them very upfront, and usually I have one or two like that, and they know, okay, if Ronaldo's calling, it's something serious, something's happened. And then one of them even puts aside money just for that reason. So it's again, that's a personal part. But emergency fund and an emergency donor. An emergency fund is I am putting myself in preparation in case something happens. An emergency donor is there's somebody else in there instead of me calling Baltimore saying, hey, by the way, so and so's been arrested. I need you to, because there's no way they can do that. I just think it's being wise. That's what God gave me. I'd also say be careful with debt. That's my other advice. Some people go into deep debt to go on the mission field. They put the plane tickets on credit cards. They put a lot of housing on credit cards, and they come off the field with $15,000, $20,000 in debt, and then they're often trying to pay back. Don't try not to go into debt on the mission field. I don't believe debt is God's provision for the mission field. If it means you have to live a little leaner, then you live a little leaner. It's okay. I have no problem with you going on the mission field with debt, but have a plan to pay off that debt. Have a plan. When I first went on the field in the 90s, I had a little bit of debt. But then I said, in my integrity, I don't feel right leaving the country without a plan for that. So I began to pay it off monthly, little bit by little bit by little bit, little bit, and it was gone when I came off the field. So I think be careful with debt. Be careful with debt. This is an American society for us who are listening to you, who are Americans. The plastic, you just dump tickets on the plastic. You buy new suitcases on the plastic. Before you know it, you come back for a convention, you look at $15,000 in debt. What you don't want to do is come off the field and have 5-figure debt waiting for you. So I would say be careful with debt. Some people teach you shouldn't have debt at all. I don't subscribe to that. I don't think that's exactly God's perfect will. I don't want to tell people who to have debt, how not to have debt, but be careful with debt on the mission field. Sometimes things happen. You get stuck somewhere, you have no money, you got to throw something. Okay, have a plan. Okay, have a plan. If you went into debt with a purpose that was for God, have a plan to pay it off and do it. Finally, I would say my advice would be to you is that don't remove faith from your managing your finances. There's going to be some opportunities in your monthly budget. There's going to be things that happen. You say, okay, we don't really have the money for that. Okay, we give 3 ways we can trust God. We can trust God to bring in the money. Okay. Number 2, we could save and trust God that the money will come. Or we can take money from a certain situation and say, okay, God, normally I'd save this money for this, but I'm going to trust you for this because I think this is your will. But I want to be careful that in James 4:3, I pray amiss. I get so emotionally motivated. I get so charged. I get so fired up in my emotions that I don't think through the decision. That's what the Hebrew word for prudence is. It means to think a thought through to its conclusion and measure the profitability of it. I want to be prudent with money. I want to be liberal but prudent. I want to be free, but at the same time, I want to be free with direction. I want to have direction and guidance, like any other part of my life. I don't pray carelessly. I don't serve carelessly. I don't disciple carelessly. So why should I handle money carelessly? I want to be careful with that.
Okay, beautiful. Those are incredible principles that we can use. Love the aspect of tithing your support. Just a heartfelt recognition. This is straight from the hand of God, and I know the source that's providing, and I'm giving it back to God. Beautiful, and some really practical aspects of the emergency donor. Imagine having, someone like that. I have a question actually for both of you. Actually, it's from me. I just thought of it today. So actually, while you were speaking, I never was on the mission field. I supported myself like partially. You had the 6% there, Pastor Dan. You did, but I believe you guys have actually been supported, you could say, almost 100%. Okay? And I want to know how you make that transition. Like, we haven't seen the righteous forsaken, his seed begging for bread. And there's a sense of control when you're supporting yourself in a bit. You have a sense of control. And it's almost like you're not going to cast on the other side of the boat. You're going to stick to your own. I'm just saying that. I'm being hard on myself a little bit. And so I can hear you guys' answers about, launching into the deep and trusting God for your finances, which is, you could say you had jobs, we learned how to work, you got educations, and it's like we always thought we had to. But tell us how you release yourself into the hands of God in terms of that in your life. And either one of you guys can speak. I want both of you guys to say something, because I want you to tell me that question, that answer.
I'll cede my time to the gentleman from Pittsburgh.
Okay, go ahead, Pastor Stan. You guys are 5-0, I believe.
They are.
Maybe you should go first, Pastor Ronaldo, because here's my problem. For me, I don't know why, but Pastor Gary's sound is breaking up, and I didn't really. I find it.
Okay.
Okay.
He'll
Good
maybe
enough.
paraphrase the question,
Yeah.
and then go from there, and then see if you can hit it, Pastor Stan.
If I'm getting you correctly, and I got to because I'm in the studio, how do I transition from being self-supported to being completely living off the support of my donors?
Right.
But I think that transition is difficult when you begin that way. If you began where you were kind of earning part of your support yourself, whether it's working a summer job or like Kathy Pretori used to be with us in Uganda. She worked for a nurse during the summer. Then she'd get back in Uganda and she would just live off of the money she raised because she could make good money as a nurse. I know Pastor Chris does work here during the summer, and he makes a good chunk of his support, and then he goes back, but he also gets supported. I think it's harder when you begin doing it yourself to completely let go. It's very hard because the word you used I like was control. Like when you're working and you're earning your money and then using your money for your call, there's a measure of control there. And you also are a little bit more liberal in your budget because you know how much you make. There's a bit of safety there. There's a consistency. Like, I'm going to make this much, so I know I'm going to at least have this much. There's a bit of a safety net. So I actually started different than both of you. I started out with $200 in a plane ticket, and I didn't work at all. I didn't save. I saved $200.
You're not living by your example.
Yeah. In other words, I was when I this is years ago. I didn't prepare well. I went out crazy. I literally did. I was like 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Let's go get it. I'm after it. And I just went out and I had a plane ticket. I had $200. I remember getting on the mission field. And I told the team leader, rent what? I didn't have rent. I didn't have food money. I remember the team leader and his wife just said, okay, you'll live with us. They didn't charge me rent. I ate for free. They just had pity on me because they saw how ridiculous I was with money. And then, so I started out like that. And then as I got more support, I did more things. Like I walked everywhere because I couldn't afford transportation. I used to do visitation with people because I knew I could eat at their house. That was lunch, visitation at their house. So I kind of I grew into not of having support. I never worked. All my years on the field, I never really worked on the field. I just lived off the support I got. So for me, I remember there was some sad months where we were down like $12 a month, $14. We had some months like that. I just lived. I got behind. I lived off of what I got. It is kind of a roller coaster because it's interesting. People remember you in October and November, and you get a pretty decent size support in November and December, Thanksgiving and Christmas. But then January comes and it's the worst month for giving, period. No matter what it is, January is just bad. The world kind of shuts down in January. So support usually is low. So you kind of brace yourself in December. You party in December, you cry in January, and you recover somewhere near Easter. For me, that's all I've ever known. So I've never known what it's like to work and earn part of my support and then be on the field. But as I got older, when I would come home for seasons, I would get jobs. I had one supporter said, okay, well, I'll buy you a plane ticket and give you $1,000 if you go work the New York State Fair for a month. So I'm sitting there at the New York State Fair working a booth. I did things in the summer. I started learning how to work. So I did it backwards. I first started with no support, and then eventually, when I would come home, I'm like, I gotta make things happen because I don't have a ticket, or I would raise the money out of my support, so I would have a ticket to fly back to America and buy back to my field. So then I'd be trapped in my field. So I was guaranteed to get home get back to the field, and then when I'd be home, I'd be raising money like crazy to leave with cash so that I could prepare and that's how I did it. And then eventually, I would do more and more things. I would try things. I got a family, and you have a family. There's a sense of urgency. You realize, okay, and that's where it gets kind of risky because when you have a family, it's not just you taking the risk. It's your wife, it's your kids, and it's a little more aggressive. I would love to recommend that if you found a way to make money on the field, somehow you should do so. I would love to say, if you work during the summers, whatever, capitalize on that because there's going to be some guys that give you one-time gifts that love what you're doing. And then they might also give you other ways to help you out. They might say, okay, come work like I got. Come work for me. I'll give you this. Great. You may have supporters like that. So, but I can promise you right now that you said it best. It's a call. If it's a call, sometimes it looks like a plane ticket and $200 and just trusting God. Sometimes it looks reckless.
Yeah.
But I will say this, when you get in that situation, understand why you're here. Understand why you're here. It's amazing how you can live when you know you're walking in the call of God. how lean you can be, how super lean you can be. You can just you find yourself eating a meal with chicken feet. You find yourself no meat Tuesdays and Thursdays. You just start making different kind of options. You just live and you just walk in the call and say, okay, and you just this is what it is. So that my thought is, it's about why am I here? You have to constantly. The verse that comes in mind is Psalm 16 verses 8 through 11. I have set the Lord before my face. I have set my call before my face, and I will not be moved. Why am I here? I have to continually rehearse purpose. I got to continue to rehearse why I'm here. Get my motive, get my practice from my purpose. How I handle my finances, how I practice handling my finances based on my purpose. Without my purpose, my practice gets scatterbrained. But with my purpose, it becomes the steering wheel for my practice. So, okay, we can't afford that. Okay, well, we can do that once a month. We can do that. I remember I used to take Linda and Charity for ice cream on Sundays for like $2, but that was it. Well, I didn't get anything, but I said, okay, that'll bless them. That's in our budget. We can do that. That's fine. But it was like that. It was literally like, okay, what you can and what you can't do. And it's not so much a prohibition, but a discipline. And there's a difference. A lot of folks see, okay, I can't spend money. I can't go to Eurocon every year. That's a prohibition. No, it's a discipline. I can't make it every year, but I can make it some years. And maybe I can plan wiser. Maybe when I come home, I can make a plan to try to save small, and then I can go. Or maybe I can send my wife. You just figure it out. And it's not suffering. It's just the call of God, It's the call of God. It's the mission. It's the mission field. And we sit back later, missionaries sit back, and usually there's two types of stories missionaries have. The first one is sick. We talk about various degrees of being sick, and then crazy ways that God has been faithful with money.
Yeah. That's
our conversation. It's crazy, it's being sick, and crazy ways that God was faithful with money. And he's like, you won't even believe what happened. Like I remember one time in Zimbabwe, I had no groceries at home. I'm walking home from a church saying, okay, what am I going to do here? I'm walking with two guys that are living with me. They're on the team. They don't know we have no money for groceries. And there's a balled up $100 bill on the ground. I'm like, is that a $100 bill? And the guy said, I think so. I said, really? This is Harare, Zimbabwe at 9 o'clock at night. Are you serious? We're walking home because we don't have transport money. I'm going like, what? It's $100. So middle of the month, we were gold. Just, okay, just great. We always have those two stories, right? I got sick. I was in bed for 6 days, and I turned 3 shades of the rainbow in bed. But then on the other side of that, how God is faithful with money. So my answer is, why am I here? That's how you make the transition. If I have to work, I will work. If I can't find work, then God's got a provision. Why am I here? I didn't jump on the plane for God to have everything worked out. I jumped on the plane to serve God and find God and then trust him to work it out. But he didn't give me instructions on how, right? Like Abraham in Hebrews 11, going and not knowing. Some things you can't grab everything, So that's my answer.
Beautiful. Beautiful. We do all have stories about budgets and how we didn't have.
Being sick, too.
I'm not going to talk about those stories right now when I got sick in Africa. I'm not going to talk about that.
I'm being kind. I'm holding mine back.
Okay. But Pastor Stan, what's it like to release yourself to, you're at the mercy of your supporters. And how do you adjust to that in your mind? And I'm supported by other people being faithful to me. How do you think about that?
Yeah. First of all, let me say that that did so much good to my heart just to hear what Pastor Ronaldo was just saying there. Man, it's so good to be with you guys. So happy for this. Like when when Karen and I, when we started, like I said, we didn't have hardly anything. And the missions office at that time in Baltimore said, how are you gonna do this? And we just, I don't know, I somehow I convinced them that it was gonna work out.
Wait, I gotta interrupt you just for a second. We want to remind people that our missions office, it doesn't have, you don't respond back to the missions office and say, what is your plan, missions office? We don't we're talking about our plan right now on this. So go ahead, Pastor Stan. We don't have a plan, really.
Yeah.
We're scrappy.
We don't have a plan for you.
Yeah.
God does.
Yeah.
Thank God that that's how we operate.
Yeah.
Honestly, like this is why we enjoy even like doing these things together, meeting together. Recently, I was able to be up there, and right now I'm in my 14-day isolation, and I'm in jail in my house now for 14 days because of coming back, but so like I said, like we didn't have, and then eventually, so I was, sort of like, okay, I can work, I can do enough, I can, because we're convinced that we're supposed to be here. And then gradually, back then in the 90s, gradually the support started, people started to give more money. And people it's interesting. When I was trying to get money from people, it never worked. And when I stopped trying to get money from people, and just said that this is a calling and we're going to be here, then the money actually started to happen and donors started to give. But then it was a new thing. It was like what you were saying. It was like a new thing. All right, so now, but what Karen and I did was every month we would look and just sit down together and sometimes really weep, because we know these people and we know, okay, so this person, like their business is actually difficult right now, and in one case, like the one guy was supporting us and various other missionaries, and I knew his business was actually in a downward mode, but he didn't decrease the support. And actually what he did was, in the house, his wife started working. And, I mean, we sometimes Karen and I, we would just sit down and weep and just say, wow, this is amazing what people are doing for missions. And so I think that helped us, just because we know the people, And if it was a church, all right, so you visit the church and you get to know the people who are actually, because it's not just some business, it's a person. It's a person with a conviction that this is important. And so, and we do, Karen and I still do, like 25 years later, we pray for the people. We think about the people. We make it a point to know what's going on, like what's happening in the lives of these people, and prayer and thinking about it, and then saying, like, because nobody's obligated, so like the next month you don't know actually,
right.
Okay, so but then the next month you don't know, and so like my family is very concerned about me.
Still?
I visited my family when I was up there, and my mom bought me a Pittsburgh Steelers T-shirt.
Wow.
By the way, so I was visiting, but my family, like they're actually a little bit concerned, like, well, what's going to happen? And I'm like, well, like we try to be as responsible as we can with the money, but at the same time, it's faith, right? It has to be by faith. It's a life of faith. It's not with, like, I loved what Pastor Ronaldo was saying. Every part of it is true, and every part of it is spiritual. And this is actually, what can I say? It works.
Yeah,
like
it does.
faith really works, and
it does.
walking by faith actually, and knowing, okay, well, so what is God's plan?
Yeah.
And then saying, okay, so when the money, but here's another point, when the money goes up, what am I supposed to do with that money? If the
Great.
support increases, then okay, then it's not it's not for nothing. It's
Right.
for something,
Yeah.
right? So if the money goes up, listen, actually, Pastor Morrison told me this one time in the church in Marlborough was actually has been supporting us this whole time. And and they and one time Pastor Morrison told me, this was, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, and he said, our finances are increasing. We actually have money. And he said, I was talking with the elders of the church, and I told them, I'm not so happy about this. You know what I'm saying? Like the money, we got too much money laying around. We should be doing something with it.
Wow.
So they did, right? So they did, and so when that happened with me and with us, then because there was a time where I was just on the field wherever I was, whether it was Argentina or Peru. But then there was a time when I said, like, hey, I can start visiting more of our churches here in Latin America.
Wow.
And that actually became then a new, I would say, like a new aspect of our ministry here in Latin America started to happen with that, and being able to actually go around and be like in Costa Rica and Mexico and Cuba. And maybe I'm not supposed to say that. I'll erase that part of the tape.
It's gone.
And Venezuela and
It's a great,
and
Pastor Stan, it's a great example of how, I mean, even how you have been led, I mean, with your finances, whatever, increasing, but you have been like you could say, have a bishop kind of aspect of leading the churches in South America. And we see you at conferences. You go to Eurocon. You came here for the men's retreat. It just it's extremely edifying the way you use your support to let you know that, and also your supporters. There's one question I want to get to before we leave. What are the dangers? Have you faced any dangers in terms of actually receiving money? Are there things where your heart got involved? You hit it there, Pastor Stan, like this increase of money. What do you do with it? But are there dangers you want to warn people of? With this money, how you can it can influence you, how it can change you. Just we have a few minutes left. If we could talk about that for a few minutes.
I would say living beyond your means, number one. I'd say number two, living the way everybody else lives, because they may not have the same support. Number three, I would say be careful how you use your money in front of nationals, because they may not have the same amount of money that you do. And in your liberality, you might be a stumbling block. Number four, I would say be careful of what you get behind financially, because people will start looking to you and not looking to God. I'd say next, I'd be careful with how I hold my money, meaning, am I opening up a bank account in the country that I'm in? Am I keeping the money in the house? I'd be careful with that. How do I receive my money matters. I would say in managing your money, be careful when the money doesn't come. Don't call Baltimore and start losing your mind, because there's human beings involved behind how you get your money. I have been both sides of that now, and things happen. I've been the guy yelling, and I've been the guy yelled at. You can always measure a guy's walk with God by the way he handles money. So anyway, so you want to be careful there. I would say also how you store your money, how you spend your money. I would say another pitfall would be with money. Remember about, like I said, those two adjustments you have. The first adjustment you have where you're used to spending money in your home country, you go to another country, and the currencies aren't the same, so you have a tendency to overspend. So those would be my pitfalls.
Beautiful.
And lastly, Be careful with loans. I have a principle. I don't really loan money. If God says give it, I give it. If God says don't give it, I don't give it. My financial position does not determine God's leading. The need that doesn't justify the call. I want to be led by God. So don't loan money. As a missionary, don't loan other missionaries money. As a missionary, don't loan money to nationals. Don't do it. It will wreck the relationship.
Yes, great. Yes, Ananias and Sapphira, they didn't know how to handle money, or they coveted it, and it resulted in their death. And whereas someone, used it properly, but they did not know how to manage it. Go ahead, Pastor Stan. Is there anything you would like to say in the last few minutes that we have with you here on this subject?
I would add this to the danger list there. It was a good one. I love the thing. Don't loan money. Yeah. Give it. Not depending necessarily on what you have, but is it God? Is God in it?
Yeah.
But then the other thing that I would add to the list of dangers is, don't forget that the money did come from like some money tree, but it actually came from a person. Who was generous to give it. Don't connect it with a person, connect it with people, remember the people, pray for the people, thank God for the people, visit the people, do whatever you can to stay, just to let that be a part of what's going on, that you connect it and identify it's the person. It's a generous person, and thank God for it.
Amen. I just to think of, we have a person in the studio here, Seb Palmieri, just to think of his father, just told me once about his family lived as on the mission field, but his father told me once just about the faithfulness of God. And I saw him serving God in God's faithfulness with incredible joy. And I'll never forget maybe how little they actually had, but the riches of joy that they had, and the wisdom that he had, and the love that he had for the things of God. And he came to our little apartment with some croissants and some coffee, and that's all we had that day, or we had other things. But the point is that there was so much joy with so little, so much fullness of God with so little. And like with the message we heard last night from Pastor Justin, just the amazing God that knows what we need, and he knows how to supply our needs. And we have this confidence where actually Paul said to the Philippian church, he told them about the people in Caesar's palace, you know what I mean, that he was a minister there. So this is our week. Next week, we're going to speak about women on the team.
Yes, sir. Women
on the team is going to be the theme for next week. What an incredible 2-week subject we've had here the last 2 weeks on finances. And we're going to keep having these themes that are extremely relevant to missionaries. And by the way, we want people to think about missions, to take the gospel into all of the world. So next week, we'll be back again at the same time with women on the team. So see you then. Pastor Stan, thanks for joining us. And Pastor Ronaldo, thanks for being in the studio with us. Great content. Thank you, guys.